then at Scott. He smiled at her, and she came running towards me for a hug. "Congratulations," I said, handing Scott his glass of champagne. "You've made my best friend very happy." "I'm so glad you dated that idiot Hector," he said, laughing. "I love you, Dolly." His eyes filled with tears and he gave me a hug. I wondered if he knew how I was feeling. I wondered if he'd always known. Maybe that's why he tried to include me on the night they got engaged, gave me my own project, somehow involved me. 2 hours later, Farley had asked me to be her maid of honour. I had drunk the lion's share of the celebratory champagne and I was feeling vocal. "I want to make a speech," I slurred at AJ and picked up a fork to tap against my glass. "No, darling," AJ said, taking the fork away from me and signalling at the other girls who swiftly removed all the cutlery from the table and gave it to the waiter. "No speeches." "But I'm her fucking maid of honour." "I know, babe, but there will be plenty of time for speeches." When AJ went to the loo, I crawled under the table and found her car keys in her handbag. I clinked them to the glass with a ding, ding, ding. "When I first found out that Scott and Farley were engaged, yeah, sure, I was pissed off about it," I announced. "Oh, God," Belle groaned. "Because I've known this little widow for over 25 years. "Over 25 years?" Lacey asked Hicks. "Shut up!" I shouted, pointing at Lacey, my wine spilling onto the table. "This is shit! You're not maid of honour anymore!" Farley drunkenly heckled across the table. "But when I look around, I see the world," I paused for dramatic effect, "is just as it should be. For my best friend has won the best man." "Oh," everyone said with a collective outbreath of relief. "To Scott and Farley," I bellowed through tears and sat down. Everyone gave a weak round of applause. "Beautiful," Belle whispered to me, "even though I know you took that from Julia Roberts' speech in my best friend's wedding." "Oh, she won't know," I hissed and flapped my hand dismissively. The rest of that evening, I'll be honest, is a bit of a blur to this day. I invited Dilly and her husband, who were in the area celebrating Valentine's Day, along for the celebrations. I did the can-can in the dining area of the bar while singing "One" from a chorus line and high-kicked a tray of plates clean out of a waiter's hands, smashing them to pieces on the floor. I said goodbye to Scott and Farley, then went back to my flat in Camden and made everyone carry on drinking until 6 a.m. I woke up next to a semi-clothed Hicks who had "Happy Valentine Day" written on her breasts in liquid eyeliner. I spent the next day watching Farley's engagement weekend. I don't want to seem too precious about this particular detail, but I had assumed one evening was sufficient, unfold on social media. There was a family barbecue, lunch at the Wolseley, Scott's friends and their wives showering her with gifts like Smythes and wedding planner notebooks and magnums of champagne, making my framed print look a bit measly. I began to feel like the fourth forgotten wise man who'd bought a piece of tat off Etsy. "I think you found Friday night quite overwhelming," Farley said on the phone. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I don't know what you mean, overwhelming. I mean, I'm not the one who got engaged. You're the one who seemed overwhelmed. I saw on Facebook Michelle bought you that Smythes and wedding planner book. That's nice, isn't it? Do you want to go to dinner next week, just us two?" "Sure." I emailed Hector. The first time in 4 years. "Remember me? Scott and Farley are getting married. Thank God you sent me down to your kitchen with no clothes on." He replied. He said he'd seen the news on Facebook. He told me he'd quit the city for travel PR, and he had an enormous expense account and asked if he could take me for a boozy lunch to toast our skills as matchmakers. I thought we were the thin end of the wedge of matchmakers, but I said yes because I was feeling low. I searched my inbox for all his old dirty poems in a flush of forced nostalgia. I cancelled lunch the day before it happened. "Why do you think you emailed him?" Farley asked in between bites of her burger at dinner a few days later. "I dunno. I think I just want a boyfriend." "Really?" she asked, wiping her mouth with her napkin. "You always say you don't want one." Yeah, but I've been feeling differently lately. What's triggered it? What had triggered it? I was jealous. Not of Scott this time. I was jealous of Farley. You getting engaged. Why? She asked. Because I hate that your life is so different to mine now. I hate that we have always done stuff at the same time and now we don't, I sighed. I hate that our children could be so far apart in age. I hate that you're about to buy a flat with a man and I had to beg my landlord to let me pay my rent 3 weeks late this month. I hate that you drive around in Scott's Audi he got given from work and I still can't drive. I hate that his friends are so different to me and I'm scared they'll take you away because their lives resemble your new life and mine doesn't. I know it sounds mad and it's not about me and I'm ruining your special moment and I should just be happy for you. But I feel so far behind you and I'm worried you'll run out of sight. If you had met your husband when you were 22, I would have found it really, really hard, she said. Really? Of course, I would have hated it. Because sometimes I feel like I'm going mad. You're not going mad. I would have felt exactly the same. I never chose to meet Scott when I was 22. I wasn't looking for a husband. Yeah, I said half-heartedly. And I will be there to celebrate and experience all the milestones in your life, whether they're next month or in 20 years. More like 40 years, I mumbled. I still don't live in a flat with curtains. We're not at school anymore. Stuff will happen at different times. You'll be doing some things ahead of me too. Like what? Meth? So I finally made my peace with Scott. I realised he wasn't going anywhere. I spent time with both of them, and I reprised my familiar and well-received role as official third wheel. It's an irritating typecasting, but one I do very well. Out of all my years on this earth, only a handful have been spent in a relationship. I am well-versed and rehearsed in third-wheeling. I am the three-wheelin' Dolly Alderton. My entire adolescence was spent hanging about with my friends and their boyfriends, smiling along as they play-fought on the sofa or pretending to play Snake on my phone while they snogged in a corner of the room. I smile and pretend with couples very well. It's how I've spent most weekday evenings around a table in my 20s. I let them have fake arguments in front of me about whose turn it is to load or unload the dishwasher. I laugh along when they tell long stories about each other's sleeping habits. I'm silent as they discuss details of people's lives I've never heard of in an overly animated way. No way! Priya didn't end up buying those tiles? I don't believe it. After all that... Oh, God, sorry. Explain to Dolly who Priya is and the whole story of the loft conversion from start to finish. To prove they have a wildly interesting life that doesn't involve me. And all the while I pretend I don't know why I'm third wheel, why I'm doing all the laughing and the listening. But of course, I know I'm merely an aphrodisiac in their game of domestic bliss. I know when I leave they'll rip each other's clothes off, having got all revved up on an extended joint discourse about their holiday in the Philippines, particularly when they both said the same island when I asked them what their favourite bit was. I'm just a reluctant audience member. But I sit and watch all these shows anyway because the alternative, losing my friends, is not an option. And when Farley and Scott weren't doing their bit on me, I discovered, to my utter shock, that Scott and I got on rather well. In fact, I resented that I hadn't realised this sooner, as I would have enjoyed his company when he was around when Farley and I lived together, instead of just grunting at him. He was funny and smart. He read the paper and had opinions on things. Scott turned out to be a pretty great guy, and it seemed so obvious to me in retrospect that Farley would have chosen to marry someone cool. It was something I got very wrong. When I wasn't excitedly helping Farley plan her wedding, I also made more of an effort with his friends. Whenever I had met them in the past, I had made a huge, embarrassing performance of proving I was different to them. I got excessively drunk at a Sunday lunch at our house once, and lectured them all on the meat is murder doctrine as they ate their roast lamb. Once, in a pub, I'd accused one of his friends of being a misogynist because he made a comment about my height. But after Farley and Scott got engaged, I tried my hardest to relax, be polite, and get to know them. They were, after all, the people she was spending most of her time with now. They had to be half interesting. And then suddenly, one Friday evening in August, we all stopped thinking about the wedding. Florence, Farley's 18-year-old sister, was diagnosed with leukemia. Life is on hold, was Farley's dad's refrain over the months that followed. Life was on hold. The wedding was put back a year. Florence was a bridesmaid and they wanted to make sure she was well enough by the time it came round. I had spent months obsessing over the wedding, and now I couldn't care less about it. The month after the diagnosis, it was Farley's 27th birthday. We wanted to celebrate with her to take her mind off Florence's illness, but she was drained of energy having spent every hour she could in the hospital. She didn't want to drink, she didn't want to be in a big crowd, she didn't want to have to talk to a load of people about how she was doing. Her family couldn't come as they were camping out at the hospital. It was decided by Scott. AJ and I would go over to their new flat, and he would cook the four of us dinner. The first birthday I had celebrated with Farley was her 12th. She had blown out more candles with me than without me. I remember the first one like it was yesterday, when she was still just a friend who I sat next to in maths. She wore a pink Miss Selfridge dress, and we danced the Macarena in Bushy Church Hall. But this birthday was unlike any birthday we had celebrated together. Farley was tinier than I had ever seen her, as diminutive and fragile as a baby bird. There was no boisterous hugging, no binge drinking. We were quiet and gentle, no one more so than Scott. He had got up early to go to the fishmonger, as AJ and I had both stopped eating meat. He made the most beautiful sea bass stuffed with fennel and oranges, with roast new potatoes, and laid it out with the bit and tongue concentration of a MasterChef contestant. He kissed Farley's head every time he walked past her. He held Farley's hand under the table. I saw the man she'd fallen in love with. I texted Scott in the kitchen to tell him I had a tray of birthday cupcakes hidden behind the sofa. We waited for Farley to go to the loo, and AJ barricaded her in with a chair while I manically scattered the cakes across a platter and Scott searched for a box of matches. "What's going on?" Farley yelped. "1 minute!" I shouted as Scott and I lit all the candles. We sang her happy birthday and presented her with her gifts and card. She blew out the candles and laughed while the three of us enveloped her in a big group hug. "Why did it take ages?" she asked. "Did you bake them while I was having a piss? I was in there so fucking long I started doing my thigh exercises." "What thigh exercises?" AJ asked. "Oh, these new lunges I've read about." She started leaning up and down, some of her old, vibrant colour trickling through her face. "I try and do them every morning. I don't think it's making any difference. My legs still look like giant gammon joints." AJ started emulating her, bobbing up and down stiffly, being instructed by Farley like a Rosemary Connolly video. Scott looked across the room and caught my eye. He smiled at me. "Thanks," he mouthed. I smiled back at him, and all at once realised the world that now lay between us. The invisible dimension created from the history and love and future we shared for this one person. It was then I knew. Everything had changed. We had transitioned. We hadn't chosen each other, but we were family. The Bad Date Diaries. A £300 restaurant bill. It is December 2013, and I'm on my third date with a handsome entrepreneur I met on Tinder. He's the first rich man I've ever dated, and I feel deeply conflicted about him spending money on me. Sometimes, when he politely picks up the bill, I feel flattered, like this is how adult courtship is meant to work. In other moments, I feel frustrated with myself for getting so predictably weak-kneed about an older bloke with a fast car and a drinking problem buying me champagne. This manifests itself in uncontrollable anger at him. "You can't own me!" I shout for no reason in the Mayfair restaurant he's chosen, 3 bottles of wine to the good. "I'm not a possession for you to own. I won't guilt myself into getting all dressed up just so you'll buy me lobster. I can buy it myself." "Fine, darling, buy it yourself," he slurs. "I will," I squawk. "I'm not going Dutch. The whole thing." The waitress comes over with the bill for £300. I go to the loo to text my flatmate AJ, asking her to lend me £200 and to transfer it into my account immediately. The Bad Party Chronicles. My House in Camden, Christmas 2014. I have been pushing for a Rod-Stewart-themed party since we moved into our Camden house 2.5 years ago. My thinking is that Rod-Stewart as a concept bridges the gap of the extreme campness of Christmas and the careless joie de vivre of a 20-something house party. My flatmates, Belle and AJ, reluctantly agree that our Christmas drinks party be Rod-Stewart-themed, but stress that they want no accountability for it. In the run-up to the party, I both prematurely age and bankrupt myself by tracking down Rod-Stewart-themed memorabilia. We have plastic cups with his face on, Rod-Stewart ashtrays, mince pies customised with sugar paper Rod-Stewart faces, a life-size Rod-Stewart cardboard cutout, a Rod-Stewart sign signalling where the loo is, and a Rod-Stewart banner with "Merry Christmas, baby" on it. Sabrina, India, Farley, Lauren and Lacey come early to help deck the house out with Rod decorations, and all of them agree with Belle and AJ that it was a complete waste of money. "Oh, God," I say, pinning the banner to the wall while Sabrina holds the chair I stand on. "I've just realised the Faces posters I ordered haven't arrived on time. Do you think anyone will mind?" "No," she sighs. "No one will mind about any of this other than you." The first guests to arrive at 7 o'clock on the dot are my charming, rather loud new American friend who I've only met once previously, and her bearded boyfriend. It is clear they've been drinking all day. They also have brought their Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, dressed in a tiny Christmas jumper. The other guests don't start trickling in until 9 o'clock, so we try to catch up with our first two guests, but alas, the boyfriend passes out on the sofa with his spaniel on top of him for the rest of the evening, so he's in plain sight of anyone who enters the party. Friends trickle in slowly, one by one. Things are stilted. The man continues to be passed out with the dog on him, which creates an arresting eyesore on entry to the party. One guest, a friend of a friend, a music video director from the cool Peckham contingent, walks in, takes one look at the tableau, makes up that he has another event to go to that he forgot about and leaves. Halfway through the evening, I go to the bathroom to take a break from the crowd, made up of completely disparate social groups who have nothing to say to each other. You Wear It Well playing on repeat in the background while people complain about the Rod-only playlist. AJ and Belle are in there. AJ sitting on the loo, Belle on the side of the bathtub. We talk about how bad the party is. We think of ways we can get people to leave and make it end. AJ says she needs to have a lie down for 10 minutes because she feels tired and miserable. There's a knock on the bathroom door and my brother comes in. "Quite a weird crowd down there, guys," he says. When I reappear downstairs, the guest mass has dwindled in size even further. There is a very tall skinhead bloke in a leather bomber jacket raiding the fridge. Hi. Who are you?" I ask. "I was told to come here," the man says in a thick Romanian accent, sipping from a can of beer he's helped himself to. "For delivery." "Delivery?" "Yes," he says, looking at me conspiratorially. "Delivery." "OK, would you mind just—" I guide him to the front door. "Just waiting here." I walk past the American, who is slow dancing with her bejumpered dog to Sailing while a perplexed audience looks on. Her boyfriend has been passed out lying across the sofa for well over 3 hours now. "Right, I think someone's drug dealer is here," I announce irritably to the crowd. "I'm sorry to be a party pooper, and I don't blame you for wanting to get high at this terrible party, but can you please ask all your drug dealers to wait outside, or at least in the hallway?" The party wraps shortly after midnight. The next morning over coffee, me and Belle do a 2-man Chilcot inquiry into how it all went so wrong. I suggest that the preparation I did for the theme might have built up expectations too high. "You made a rod for your own back," she says, nodding sagely. We keep the Rod-Stewart cardboard cutout in the living room for a while, a reminder to never get ahead of yourself in this life. We deck him out topically, putting a pink bra on him during the Lord Sewell scandal and a leprechaun's hat on St. Patrick's Day. When we move flat 8 months later and pack up the house, we leave nothing except the Rod-Stewart cutout in the middle of the living room, passing the curse of bad parties onto the future tenants. Recipe. Got kicked out of the club sandwich. Serves 2. Regularly eaten with AJ as we sat on the kitchen countertop, swinging our legs back and forth, shouting about that dickhead bouncer who said we were too drunk to go back in and that we were letting the rest of the group down. 2 eggs, 4 slices of bread, sourdough preferable, white Hovis acceptable, mayonnaise, Dijon mustard, rocket, optional, olive oil and butter for frying, salt and black pepper to season. Fry eggs in olive oil and a smidge of butter in a piping hot pan. Spoon the oil over the eggs once or twice to cook the yolk. Toast the bread. For each sandwich, spread 1 slice with mayonnaise and 1 slice with mustard. Fill each sandwich with 1 fried egg and a handful of rocket. Season with salt and pepper. Eat in about 5 big sloppy bites. Get mustard on your face. Pour any alcohol left in your flat into 2 clean receptacles. For us, this was usually the old bottle of toffee vodka Farley got given at Christmas 2009 that lived at the back of the freezer. Play a Marvin Gaye record. The Bad Date Diaries. A mid-morning, completely sober snog. Spring 2014. I wake up to my alarm on a Saturday at 9 a.m, having had 5 hours sleep. There is a WhatsApp message from dishy American Martin. Dollface, we still on for a cup of joe? My head feels like it's been turned inside out like a dirty sock, but I tell him I'll be there. We matched on Tinder 3 days ago, and it's been a solid stream of, no way, that's my favourite Springsteen album. I believe in reincarnation too. Yes, perhaps we are all wanderers, and so on. In this moment, as I search my room for last night's fake eyelashes and glue them back on, I'm convinced he will be my boyfriend by the end of the week, and I will move to Seattle with him next month. For this is the only logical solution in the head of a single, hungover woman who is embarrassed that she fell off a bus the night before. Marriage and immigration. The outfit? A huge Aran jumper so oversized it hangs like a dress, denim hot pants because all my jeans are dirty, a pair of laddered tights, and white plimsolls. No coat? My hungover housemate AJ croaks as I rush past her on the stairs. No need, I say breezily. You stink of Baileys, by the way, she shouts as I close the door. Martin sits at the bar of Caravan King's Cross. Thankfully, he is identical to his pictures. He is writing in a notebook as I arrive, which I think adds a nice touch of theatre to the whole nomadic lost soul agenda he pushes with his whimsical Instagram account I've already stalked. What are you writing? I ask over his shoulder. He turns, looks at me and smiles. None of your business, he replies, and kisses me on both cheeks. It is already extremely flirty, and we haven't even had a coffee, let alone 6 beers. I think it's because he's American. Martin tells me the story of his life. Illustrator from Seattle, nearing 40, earned a load of money from a big job and decided to use it to travel the world for a year and write a book. He's doing some Tinder tourism to meet new people. He's been in England for a month. He wants a few more weeks in London, then he's on his travels again. Aside, I noticed at the time that Martin was particularly vague when I asked him what his book was about, other than saying it was non-fiction. I also noticed he wrote a couple of things down when I was talking. He took the notebook with him when he went to the loo and was in there for quite a long time. I decided either A, his bowels had had a bad reaction to caffeine and he wanted to pass some time on the loo relaxing with his thoughts. B, he was just a private man and sensed I was a nosy, hungover person with no boundaries who might want to read his notebook when he went to the loo. C, he was writing something embarrassing, like his cosmic shopping list or how many people he'd slept with and didn't want me to read it. Or D, He was writing a book about all the women he'd dated in England, and I was up next. I've always thought it was option D, and to this day I'm still waiting to see a book called Green and Pleasant Slags, My Time with English Women, on the shelves at Waterstones, with an embarrassing paragraph about me in it. After our coffees, we sit outside the cafe on a bench, staring at the water fountain spurting in a rhythmic, pornographic way, and he quotes Hemingway, which I think is a little overkill, but I'm enjoying the fanciful tone of the date, so I go along with it. He gets out another notebook that he's illustrated with maps of every country he's visited so far, his tracks sketched as twee footprints. I ask if he has a girl in every port. He laughs and says, something like that, in his annoying, wonderful accent. He takes me by the hand and leads me down the steps at the front of Central St. Martin's Art College to the canal. We walk a little until we stand under the nearest bridge. Then he unbuttons his coat, pulls me in and wraps it round me. He kisses my head, my cheeks, my neck and my lips. We kiss for half an hour. The time is 11 a.m. Martin and I part ways at 11:30 and thank each other for the lovely morning. I'm back in bed by 12:30 and sleep all afternoon. I wake up at 4, convinced I dreamt the whole thing. Predictably, Martin falls off radar after our coffee morning and is vague about when our next date is when he does get in touch. A week later, tanked up on Friday night Prosecco and encouraged by my friends, I send Martin a WhatsApp message riddled with spelling mistakes, asking if I may be frank and suggesting we embark on a platonic but sexual relationship while he is in London. I suggest I become his girl in the London port. I tell him it's what Hemingway would do. Martin never messages me again. Everything I knew about love at 25. Men love a woman who holds it all back. Make them wait 5 dates to have sex with you. 3 dates at the very least. That's how you keep them interested. The boyfriends of your best friends will annoyingly stick around. Most of them won't be exactly who you imagined your best friend would end up with. Suspenders and stockings can be bought cheap and in bulk on eBay. Online dating is for losers, and I include myself in that. Be endlessly suspicious of people who pay to have an embarrassing profile on a dating website. Forget what I said earlier about using hair removal cream when you're dating someone. If you go bald, you're letting the sisterhood down. We need to actively take a stand against the patriarchal control of female anatomy. Never make an album as good as Blood on the Tracks, Our Album, with a boyfriend, because years after you break up, you still won't be able to listen to it. Don't make that mistake at 21. If a man loves you because you're thin, he is no man at all. If you think you want to break up with someone, but practical matters are getting in the way, this is the test. Imagine you could go into a room and press a big red button that would end your relationship with no fuss, no breakup conversations, no tears, no picking up your things from his house. Would you do it? If the answer is yes, you have to break up with them. If a man has always been single at 45, there's a reason. Don't hang around to find out what it is. The worst feeling in the world is being dumped because they say they don't fancy you anymore. Always bring a man back to your house, then you can trick him into staying for breakfast and trick him into falling in love with you. Casual sex is rarely good. Fake orgasms will make you feel guilty and terrible, and they're unfair on the guy. Use them sparsely. Some women get lucky and some women don't. There are good guys and bad guys. It's sheer luck who you end up with and how you get treated. Your best friends will abandon you for men. It will be a long and slow goodbye, but make your peace with it and make some new friends. On long, lonely nights when your fears crawl over your brain like cockroaches and you can't get to sleep, dream of the time you were loved, in another lifetime, one of toil and blood. Remember how it felt to find shelter in someone's arms. Hope that you'll find it again. Reasons to have a boyfriend and reasons not to have a boyfriend. Reasons to have a boyfriend. More likely to get a proper birthday cake. Access to Sky TV? Something to talk about. Something to talk at. Sunday afternoons. More sympathy when you do something really wrong at work. Someone to grope your bottom in the queue for popcorn. Holidays for one are very expensive. And it's impossible to put sunscreen on your own back. Sometimes you can't manage a whole large pizza to yourself. Might have a car. Nice to make a sandwich for someone other than yourself. Nice to think about someone other than yourself. Regular sex that isn't weird. Warmer bed. Everyone else has one. If you have one, people will think you're lovable. If you don't have one, people will think you're shallow and dysfunctional. The relief of not having to flirt with people. Fear of dying alone, the void, etc. Reasons not to have a boyfriend. Everyone annoys you other than you. Debates. They probably won't like Morrissey. They definitely won't like Joni Mitchell. They'll point out when you exaggerate stories. Going to their friends' boring birthday drinks in Finsbury Park. Being told what you did the night before when you were drunk. Sharing pudding. Having to watch any live or televised sports. Having to spend time with the girlfriends of their friends and talk about The Voice. Constantly walking around in between flats with knickers in your bag. Being honest about your feelings. Having to keep your room really clean and tidy. Not reading as much. Having to keep your phone fully charged all the time so he knows you're not dead. You'll probably miss flirting with people. Hairs all over the bathroom. Tottenham Court Road and ordering shit off Amazon. When I was 21, at the tail end of my last summer spent performing at the Edinburgh Festival before I had to go home and find a job and start an adult life, I went out to celebrate the 30th birthday of my friend Hannah. She'd been directing me in a comedy sketch show that I'd been flyering for, and me and two of the other actors took her out to a posh restaurant to mark the occasion. In the run-up to the day, she'd made some vague noises about dreading turning 30, which we all assumed were exaggerated for comedic purposes. Halfway through dinner, she put down her cutlery and started crying. "Oh my God, Hannah, are you really upset?" I asked, immediately regretting the happy birthday granny card I'd given her. "I'm getting older," she said. I can feel it. I can feel it everywhere in my body. It's already slowing down, and it's only going to get slower." "You're still so young," Margaret said, who was a few years ahead of her. But Hannah continued to sob, unable to catch her breath, tears falling into her plate. "Do you want to go?" she asked, stroking Hannah's back. Hannah nodded. As we walked down Princes Street, chatting away about nothing, keen to keep the tone light and Hannah distracted, she stopped in the middle of the road and held her head in her hands. Her tears became wails. "Is this it?" she asked us, bellowing into the dark night. "Is this really all life is?" "Is what all life is?" Margaret asked soothingly, putting her arm around her. "Fucking Tottenham Court Road and ordering shit off Amazon," she replied. For years, those words were stuck on the underside of my brain like a post-it I couldn't shake off. They hung there, like a whispered conversation you overheard between your parents that you didn't understand, but you knew to be very important. I always wondered why these two specific things, Tottenham Court Road and Amazon, could cause so much sorrow. "You'll understand when you're not 21, Hannah said when I asked. I finally grasped the machinations and subtext of that phrase the year I turned 25. When you begin to wonder if life is really just waiting for buses on Tottenham Court Road and ordering books you'll never read off Amazon, in short, you're having an existential crisis. You are realising the mundanity of life. You are finally understanding how little point there is to anything. You are moving out of the realm of fantasy when I grow up and adjusting to the reality that you're there, it's happening, and it wasn't what you thought it might be. You are not who you thought you'd be. Once you start digging a hole of those questions, it's very difficult to take the day-to-day functionalities of life seriously. Throughout my 25th year, it was as if I had created a trench of my own thoughts and unanswerable questions, and from the darkness I peered up, watching people care about the things I had cared about: haircuts, the newspaper, parties, dinner, January sales on Tottenham Court Road, deals on Amazon. And I couldn't fathom climbing out and knowing how to immerse myself in any of it again. I gave up booze for a while to try and even out my mood, but it just left me overthinking even more. I tried Tinder dating, but the mainly platonic encounters left me feeling more disheartened and empty. The once passionate love and focus I had for my work was beginning to wane. My flatmates, AJ and Belle, often came into my room to find me crying while still wrapped in a towel from a shower I took 3 hours previously. I found it impossible to articulate how I was feeling to anyone. I spent huge swathes of time on my own. There was a hum in my body of disinterest, ennui and anxiety, as low and simultaneously disruptive as a washing machine on a spin that won't turn off. All of this reached a crescendo in the early summer when Dilly told me she thought I should leave my job to go be a full-time writer, and I had no plan of how to make money and where to go next. And AJ announced that she was moving out to live with her boyfriend, less than a year after Farley had gone. I was depressed, down a job, and down a flatmate. The answer was, of course, what the answer always is for a single 20-something woman prone to a touch of melodrama: move to a different city. I'd always adored New York and often went to visit Alex, who remained a close friend even after her brother Harry had ended our relationship all those years ago. When she got engaged and asked me to be her bridesmaid in the summer of my discontent, it felt fortuitous. She and her fiancé said Farley and I could stay in their Lower East Side apartment for free while they were on honeymoon. We booked our flights, a hotel for the wedding, and a one-night break to the Catskill Mountains near the end of our 2-week stay. Unbelievably, it would be mine and Farley's first holiday abroad together, and it was a good opportunity for me to recce my potential new home, its day-to-day, its people, and how I could see myself fitting into it. But a week before we were due to fly, Florence was diagnosed with leukemia. Farley understandably felt she had to stay at home to support her sister and her family. I asked if she needed me there too, but she told me to go to New York on my own and have a much-needed break. In my first 2 days in New York, I was caught in a convivial hurricane of bridesmaid duties. All of Alex's British contingent had flown over for the wedding, and the run-up was spent making wreaths and arranging chairs and picking things up from the dry cleaners and catching up with old and familiar acquaintances. I missed Farley terribly, but it was still the busy, new, wonderful embrace of distraction that I had been craving. On the day of the wedding, I wore a black strappy dress with a thigh-high split. Alex encouraged this. She knew I was in much need of a holiday romance. I also knew I would be seeing Harry for the first time in years. And I read the poem The Amorous Shepherd in the Brooklyn warehouse where they got married. When I said the line, "I don't regret anything I was before, because I still am. I only regret not having loved you," I couldn't help but cry. For the love Alex and her husband had for each other, and for the depth of loneliness I only then realised I had felt for the past year. I was one of 2 single women at the wedding, and I counted myself lucky that I'd been sat next to the one single male guest, a burly Welshman who built bridges for a living. "Good poem," he said to me in his sexy, seesawing, sing-songy accent. The tears were a nice touch. "It wasn't planned," I said. "That dress certainly was," he said with a smile. We drank Negroni after Negroni and ate fried chicken and mac and cheese and flirted in a way that is only acceptable when you're the only 2 single people at a wedding. We did a rigorous rundown of all our favourite bridges in Britain. I fed him pudding off my fork. He whooped for me when I got up to do my speech and winked when I caught his eye halfway through. He behaved as if he was my boyfriend of many years. Our relationship escalated in familiarity with the gusto of a foot on a pedal pressed right to the floor, in a way that is only acceptable when you're the only two single people at a wedding. Right before the first dance, my Welshman disappeared to take a call outside. Alex, with her crown of roses and her long white kimono-sleeved dress that made her look like a pre-Raphaelite draped in silk, led her husband to the dance floor. The humming undulation of the most romantic song I'd ever heard played. Sea of Love by Phil Phillips was a proper schmaltzy, perfect slow dance. By the chorus, all the other guests had joined them. Tens of couples, including Harry and his new girlfriend, swayed and smiled to the beautifully sentimental song. I sat on the outside looking in. I tried to imagine what it would feel like to find a sense of security in the person you went to bed with, a notion that was so foreign to me. I looked at the small gaps in between all their bodies and imagined the places that lay between them, the stories they had written together, the memories and the language and the habits and the trust and the future dreams they would have discussed while drinking wine late at night on the sofa. I wondered if I would ever have that with someone, or if I was even built to float in a sea of love, whether I even wanted to. I felt a tap on my shoulder and looked up to see Octavia, a fellow bridesmaid. She smiled and held out her hand. She led me to the dance floor and held me as we danced until the end of the song. After that, I hit the Negronis even harder. When I went outside for a cigarette and found my Welshman, I was emboldened enough by Campari to push him against the brick wall and kiss him. "I can't do this," he said, pulling away. "Why not?" I asked. "It doesn't matter," he muttered, "but I just can't." "No," I slurred. "This is not happening like this. I'm in New York. I'm on holiday. I'm a depressed bridesmaid and I'm in a slaggy dress, the split of which I paid to have taken up even higher at the dry cleaners. You are my holiday fling, okay? It's been decided." "I can't," he said. "I'd love to, but I can't." "Well, then what was with all the—" I mimed putting pudding in his mouth. "And the—" I did an exaggerated theatrical wink. "I was just flirting," he offered weakly. "Yeah, well, it was a total waste of time. You know, I was sitting next to a really interesting, really clever actor. I would have loved to have had a conversation with her. She seemed fascinating. I think I said about 3 words to her all night. I was too busy playing pretend girlfriend with you." "Oh, well, I'm sorry I was such a waste of time," he huffed, walking back into the party. The next day, I went to Alex and her new husband's flat in Chinatown to see them off on their honeymoon and toast their new marriage from the roof. We caught up on the wedding gossip, and they explained the Welshman's mixed signals. He had a girlfriend. Of course he did. Alex gave me a rundown of the apartment and handed me the keys. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. "I'll be fine," I replied. "You've got Octavia's number. She's in the city until the end of the month, so you're not alone." "I'll be fine. It's good for me to have some time on my own, get to know New York better. It will be a great adventure." "You call us if you need anything," she said, hugging me. "I absolutely will not. Go to Mexico and swim naked in the sea and drink tequila and shag yourself into oblivion," I said. The next morning, I woke up in the flat, fed their 2 black cats, watered their plants as per their instructions, and sat with a notepad to plan how I was going to spend my time here and all the things I would see and do. But there was one huge problem. A magazine was late paying me for 2 pieces of work, amounting to just under £1,000, which I'd budgeted to be more than enough for my New York spending money. I had £34 in my account and 11 days left in New York. This was quite a common occurrence as a freelance journalist. I was often chasing accounts departments for payments 3 months after a piece was published and the invoice filed. It had never been this urgent. I rang my editor. My editor referred me to the accounts department. That department transferred me from person to person, trying to work out where my overdue payment was. I lay on Alex's bed with my phone on loudspeaker for an hour, the tinny hold music blaring, the long-distance phone call racking up my bill minute by minute. The person I spoke to concluded that I'd be paid soon. With no money, and no friends, it quickly became apparent that New York was a very different place than all the other times I'd been there on holiday to visit Alex. It's not a good place to be broke. Unlike London, the museums and galleries all charge a general admission fee, most of which are $25, which would have wiped out my remaining funds. It was also the middle of August, so it was unbearably hot, meaning there was a limited amount of time I could wander around or sit in the park. This city I'd always loved, where I'd always seemed welcome, felt like it just wanted me out. When I walked down Fifth Avenue, I looked up at the skyscrapers, and they felt like large, terrifying, towering monsters trying to chase me to JFK Airport. I began to notice all the small things I hated about New York that had never bothered me before. I realised how inefficient and confusing the subway was. Unlike the London Underground with its colourful and at times regal array of line names, Jubilee, Victoria, Piccadilly, the lines have all been given the most indistinguishable and lacklustre names imaginable. A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, etc. And B can easily sound like D, and 1 could probably be 3. It's impossible to keep track of what letter or number you're meant to be catching without writing it down. In a lot of stations, the trains only come every 10 minutes, so if you're doing 3 changes and you're unlucky with timings, this could mean an extra half hour of standing around on sweltering hot platforms. To make this process even more frustrating, the majority of platforms don't have any boards letting you know when the next train is due. Then there were all those New York ball busters, those loud, pushy people in supermarkets and cafes and queues who snap at you, the ones who are either just incredibly rude or trying to give you the full immersive New York experience. Perhaps, when I'd been feeling secure and happy, I'd found it funny. But now, feeling so alone, I hated how much I was being shouted at. "Hey lady, get out of the frickin' way!" A passing waiter barked at me in Cat's Deli as I stood at the counter to order a bagel. I also noticed how much I was shoved in New York. The collective ambition of the place had never felt so overwhelming. Everyone was on their own mission. No one caught each other's eyes. People power-walked, swinging their arms like they were marching, shouting into their hands free. Even their romance was ambitious. I spent a whole afternoon eavesdropping on 2 female friends in a cafe, jabbering at each other about how they were going to meet men, and they made it sound like a military operation. It was all dates, numbers, algebra, and rules. And Christ, the rules. I'd never noticed how obsessed they all were with rules. I was told off for picking up and smelling an orange in a supermarket before I bought it. I was told off when I visited Apthorpe, Nora Ephron's beloved apartment building on which she'd written an essay, because I went too near the decorative fountain in the courtyard. I'd never considered myself a particularly anarchic creature, but the disciplinarians of New York brought it out in me. Then there were the humourless hipsters, the people who served you coffee or worked in cool shops, the people who flatly said, "That's the funniest thing I've ever heard in my whole life," with a straight, expressionless face when someone told them a joke, instead of laughing. The ones who looked you up and down for longer than felt comfortable. All the attitude of a twat from Hackney, none of the self-awareness or humour or cynicism. The scenesters in New York, who were under 30, are some of the coldest, most uninviting people I've ever met. A week into my big New York adventure, I realised that places are kingdoms of memories and relationships, that the landscape is only ever a reflection of how you feel inside. I felt more empty, tired and sad there than I'd been feeling at home. The fantasy of moving faded day by day. I had the insidious epiphany that Tottenham Court Road and Amazon would follow me wherever I went. I was still the same unfulfilled person on holiday as I'd been in my house. When I booked the flights, I thought I was booking a trip out of my head, but I wasn't. The external scenery had changed, but the internal stuff was exactly the same. I was anxious, restless, and self-loathing. One night, as I lay on Alex's sofa making my way through a bottle of leftover wedding Prosecco that she told me to help myself to, I spent the evening trying Tinder tourism as a way of meeting new people. I right-swiped nearly everyone. I sent out a vague, cheery broadcast message to all my matches, describing myself as a visitor from London looking for some New Yorkers to show her a good time. I opened a second bottle of Prosecco at midnight, just in time to receive a video call from AJ in India. "Hey!" they shouted in unison from around my kitchen table. "Hi, guys," I said. "Are you pissed?" "Yeah," India barked. "We've just been to the nicer local and bought 3 bottles of wine." "Good. I'm pissed too." "Who are you with?" AJ asked, peering into the camera. I thought about telling them what a terrible time I was having, but I didn't want to worry them. And more importantly, my pride wouldn't allow it. I'd been giving a very convincing impression on all social media channels that I was having the trip of a fucking lifetime. "No one," I replied. "I'm having some downtime tonight." We caught up for 15 minutes, and I was happy to see their familiar faces and hear all the minutiae of what they'd been up to. "Are you okay?" AJ asked when I said goodbye. "You seem a bit down." "I'm fine," I said. "I miss you both." "We miss you too," she said. They both blew kisses at me, and then I was alone again. Halfway through my second bottle of Prosecco, I got a reply from one of my Tinder matches, Jean, an attractive 32-year-old French stockbroker, who asked if I fancied a late drink. I decided this man would be my holiday fling, exactly the sort of fun, empowering escapade I needed to turn this trip into an adventure and make me feel like my old self again. He lived in Soho, a mile away, which I couldn't walk because outside a thunderstorm had begun, and I had no money left in my account for a taxi. "I've got money," he wrote. "I'll pay for your taxi." I decided to ignore the pretty woman subtext of this offer, put on some mascara and a pair of heels, and stood in the rain to find a passing cab. As I hailed one, a combination of torrential rain and torrential drunkenness caused my phone to slip out of my hand. The screen smashed into 100 fragments, the raindrops seeped into the cracks, and the screen faded to black. When I arrived at the address he'd given me, he was, thankfully, standing outside. He paid for the cab and he opened the door to let me out. "Thanks for coming," he said, pulling my face towards him for a kiss. For a brief moment, the attention of this complete stranger filled me with a light fizz of excitement, and the heaviness of my deep-rooted despondency felt like it had exited the building. Then I realised how pathetic and telling this was, and I felt instantly sadder. I needed another drink. Jean was nice enough. We had nothing in common, but conversation flowed thanks to the beer he gave me and the packet of Lucky Strike we'd chain-smoked on his sofa. I got the feeling he did this a lot. After an hour of chatting and snogging, he took me to his bedroom, a stark white box with strange neon lights and a mattress on the floor in lieu of a bed. I tried to ignore the setting as we undressed each other. Wait, he said, as I unzipped his jeans. "I only have group sex." "What? What does that mean?" I slurred. "I can only have sex if someone watches," he replied, as if it were plain logic. "Or if someone joins us." "Okay," I said. "Well, that's not going to happen now, so—" "My flatmate's next door," he said. "He wants to come in. I'll tell him it's okay?" "No, it's not okay," I said, suddenly aware of this not being a big adventure at all. I was in a bedroom with a man who could very well be Patrick Bateman. "I don't want to do that," I said, panicked, hearing the fast and heavy beat of my heart in my eardrums and looking for the nearest window. "Come on, it will be fun," he said, trying to kiss me. "You seemed like a party girl." "No, I'm not. I don't want to do that." "Okay, so we don't do that," he shrugged and rolled over. I realised just how stupid this was, how irresponsible I'd been in the search for distraction for myself. I was alone in a city I didn't know, and I was drunk. No one knew where I was, I had no money, and no phone. "I think I'm going to walk home," I said, getting out of his bed. "Okay," he replied. "It's raining, though. You can stay here if you like." I looked at his clock. 4 a.m. I could sleep until the storm had passed and it was light, then try to navigate my way back to Alex's apartment. I fell asleep as far away from him as I could, my face pressed up against his white wall. The next morning, I woke at 7:30, got dressed and went into the living room to collect my bag. Sitting on the sofa was a very, very angry-looking man in a navy dressing gown. 4 electric fans had appeared that hadn't been there the night before, and all the windows were open. There were pieces of paper stuck to the wall, all with "Fumez tout" scrawled on them in red pen, "Smoking kills" written underneath. "Good morning," I said nervously. "Get the fuck out of my apartment," he said in a French accent heavier than Jean's. "I'm sorry? I have asthma. You know that? I have severe asthma. So why the fuck are you in my apartment chain-smoking your disgusting cigarettes at 3 in the morning?" "I'm so sorry. Jean said it was fine." "Jean can go fuck himself," he spat. I went back into Jean's bedroom. "Hey," I said, shaking him to wake up. "Hey, your flatmate is in there and he's going quite nuts." Jean opened his eyes and looked at his clock. "I'm late for work," he said accusatorially. "He's going pretty crazy in there," I said. "He's angry because we were smoking last night. He's got all these fans on and he's written all these signs. It feels a bit Rain Man. He's not angry because we were smoking. He's angry because you wouldn't have sex with him." "Okay, I'm going," I said. "Have a good life." I walked out of the flat, meekly nodding at the angry French flatmate as I went. "Get out! Get out! Get the fuck out, you little bitch!" he shouted after me. I teetered into the bright Soho sunshine. It felt like I was going to retch. I went to withdraw $10 from the nearest ATM, but was informed I had insufficient funds. A wave of sickness rippled through me, and I remembered that I hadn't eaten in 2 days. As I tried to find my way home, I went into Starbucks, hoping that they left jugs of milk by the sugar sachets. I asked the man behind the counter for a paper cup and filled it with milk, sipping it slowly as I sat at a table. "Are you okay, honey?" a middle-aged woman asked. "You look like a—" She surveyed my outfit. My eyes ringed with last night's mascara dust, the cup of milk in my hand. "Like a stray kitten." "I'm okay," I replied, feeling less okay than ever before. I walked around in circles for a couple of hours until I finally saw a block of flats that I recognised. I got into Alex's apartment, put my phone in rice and curled up under her duvet with her cats, longing to pull the duvet up over the trip too. I couldn't afford a sandwich, let alone an early flight home. And I don't think I even wanted to go home. I was trapped between 2 cities I didn't want to be in. I couldn't ring Farley and ask for help because she needed my support far more than I needed hers. I couldn't ring my parents because I couldn't bear to worry them, and I was 10 years past an appropriate age for being bailed out of anything. Eventually, I rang Octavia, who showed me extraordinary kindness. She took me out for dim sum, held my hand as I talked, gave me a hug, and lent me some money. The next day, I took the 3-hour coach trip to a small town in the Catskills in upstate New York. Farley and I'd already paid for the cabin, so I thought I might as well use it, and I was grateful for the opportunity for some space and quiet and some open skies. I arrived mid-morning, dropped my bags and went for a long hike to clear my head. By the time I'd returned to my cabin in the afternoon, having marvelled at the enormity of the mountains and thought of the possibility of starting again when I returned home, I was already feeling calmer. In the evening, I walked into the town and ate cheese fries in a local diner. I delighted in the sound of crickets and the warmth and chit-chat of the locals. There was a campfire burning behind my cabin when I got back, and I took one of the blankets from my room and sat next to it, looking up at the stars. For what felt like the first time since I'd arrived in New York, I breathed. When I got back to my room, I had a new message on Tinder, a late reply from the come one, come all blanket message I had drunkenly sent 2 nights before. His name was Adam. He was 26, with a perfect all-American smile complete with Brooklyn beard and man bun. "Hello, lady," he messaged. "So sorry I didn't reply to this sooner. How are you?" "I wish you had replied sooner," I said. I could have ended up on a date with you and not being strong-armed into a threesome with 2 Frenchmen. Oh boy, he wrote. New York can be tough. How are you doing? I'm hating it, I replied. I'm in the Catskills for a night and it's a welcome break. How long have you got back in the city before you go home? 3 long days. I come back early tomorrow evening. Come hang out with me when you're back, he said. I won't try to have a threesome with you, I promise. I'll just be your friend if you like. A friend? Maybe I needed a new friend. The next day, after another long hike and a swim, I got the late afternoon coach back to Manhattan, took the subway to Brooklyn and went to Adam's doorstep. Hey, he said, emerging from the front door, his blue eyes sparkling behind horn-rimmed glasses, outstretching his arms for a hug. It's so good to meet you. Welcome back to this city you hate. Thanks, I said, falling into his hug and inhaling the clean, soapy smell of his flannel shirt. I'll make you love it. Adam showed me round his apartment, and we opened a bottle of wine. We talked for hours, told each other all our stories, about our favourite music, our favourite films, about our respective friends and families, about our jobs. He was earnest and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and curious. He was exactly what I needed. By mid-evening, we were kissing. By midnight, I was lying in his bed with my face pressed up close against his. It was the soft touch of this man, his generous heart, the tenderness he showed me that was enough to make me open up. So I told him everything. I gave it all away for nothing. I told him about the heartbreak of my early 20s. I told him about the years I'd spent starving myself in an attempt to gain some control. I told him about the one time I'd been in love, the intimacy that I couldn't bear, the dependence I feared. I told him how my friends, one by one, had fallen in love and left me behind. I told him how my anxiety had crept up on me in catatonic flare-ups since I was a child, how I couldn't stand near windows because I always felt I was moments away from falling to my death. I told him about my best friend's little sister, who I'd grown up with, who was lying in a hospital bed with cancer. I told him that I felt I was in over my head with adulthood, and about my total inability to ring anyone and ask for help. I told him about the ease with which I buried problems in a chaotic rubble of distractions. I only had the right language for my sadness with a stranger. I could only tell these stories in an ephemeral realm of fantasy in which I had no accountability. You're so sad, he said, stroking my cheek. I closed my eyes to stop the tears. I'm so lost, I replied. You're not lost now, he said, pulling me closer to him. And I wanted to believe him. So for that moment, I did. I want to say something, but it makes no sense, he said, kissing my head. What? I love you, he sighed. And I don't want you to think I'm like dangerous or crazy like that insane French guy. And I know I can't really because I've known you for, he glanced at his watch, 6 hours, but I feel like I could love you. Fuck it, I already love you. I love you too, I heard myself say. The second the words escaped my mouth, I knew how absurd they were. But I knew I wasn't saying them to him. I was saying them to something else, to the belief in hope and kindness. Adam took the next day off work, the first sick day in his life, and he took me round the bits of the city I'd never been before. We walked, we talked, we ate, we drank, we kissed. We had a typical holiday romance in 2 days. We couldn't remember what life was like without each other, but we knew we would never live life with each other. I stayed with him the following night. The next day, I tore myself away from Adam for 3 whole hours to meet Octavia, who couldn't believe everything that had happened since I'd last seen her. We went to the top of 30 Rock and looked out on the beautiful, relentless, unforgiving city. I think I want to go home, I said, staring out at the lights dancing off the Hudson River. Adam took me to JFK on my last day. After a long goodbye kiss, He held me by the shoulders and looked at me. "Okay, I have this idea," he said. "What?" "Don't think I'm